Thank you to our sponsors, Little Voices. Are you a teacher with a passion for drama, music and performance, or feeling stuck in the classroom? Little Voices gives you the chance to step into a role where you can truly inspire young minds through the arts. This is a company I know well and admire. They're passionate about child development, highly rated and genuine and transformative. With small group teaching, a focus on confidence and creativity, with the opportunity to guide children through Lambda qualifications, you can make a real impact. Plus, with the support of a nationwide franchise network behind you, you can run your own successful business, doing what you love while teaching in a way that truly fits your life. Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony podcast with myself, Sharon Corley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode,
the nursery was Ofsted registered, then parents could use these vouchers for 2 hours a day or whatever it was. And initially, and Sarah, you won't be surprised by this, I said no. We're not going to be registered by Ofsted. Because A, I could, right? And I'd had this bad experience at school and I thought, no, you see, I don't want to do what Ofsted tells me to do. I want to do what I know is right for these kids, and I don't want Ofsted to have any word in this.
hello Pit Pony listeners. Lovely episode today. Special episode really, because our guest is Ilana King, and Ilana is a friend of Connexus. Myself, Sarah and Ilana have worked together for, I think it's fair to say, many years in the world of tuition, and we've got a very, very strong bond with Ilana. So there's going to be a lot of warmth on this episode, I can feel it. And Ilana's not a typical Pit Pony route in and out of teaching, because Ilana started teaching in 1996 and stayed in the classroom for 2 years. And we're going to dig into that and find out what her experience was like in the classroom, her decision for leaving, what was the strategy behind those choices, and follow her journey through the wonderful world she's created for herself outside of the classroom. So welcome, friend. Hello, Ilana, and what is it you do today?
Thank you for having me. So today I am an educational consultant, which involves both teaching children and advising parents on school choice, mostly within the private sector at 7+, 8+, and 11+.
Beautiful. There's going to be so many people intrigued to find out about that ever-growing world. So let's go back. How many decades?
Oh, I feel old.
3 decades. Oh, we all feel old. We all feel old, because I think you probably started teaching in reception the same year there and thereabouts that I started teaching, which was the mid-90s. So cast your mind back to 1996 and your 2 years that you spent in the classroom.
So I actually would like to go back slightly further than 1996. To when I was a teenager and I read a series of books, and I couldn't tell you the name of them now, but I do remember that the author's last name started with an H. That's all I can actually remember. She was an educational psychologist, an American educational psychologist. She worked with children in the classroom, in sort of special ed classrooms as they were then, mostly children who were autistic. And I read this series of books which were written as if they were true stories, but they were kind of an amalgamation. They weren't exactly any one particular child that she had taught. And I was hooked, fascinated, and I decided that was what I was going to do. I was going to be her. Tori Hayden, I've just remembered the name. Tori Hayden, I believe, was the author. I hope I haven't got that wrong. Couldn't tell you the name of the books now, but I mean, I was absolutely hooked, and I was like, I want to be her. And so from that point, I decided I was going to be an educational psychologist. between reading those books and finishing school, I moved countries. So I was no longer in America and I was back in the UK. And the route into being an educational psychologist at that point in the UK was becoming a teacher first. So I needed qualified teacher status. I needed to go and teach in the classroom. I can't remember the number of years that were specified then. And then you could do further training to be an educational psychologist. So that was the route that I took. And I went to university and did a psychology degree. And then I went and did my PGCE. And I did that I was able to specialize. I did that in Roehampton Institute, and I was able to specialize in early years. And I was particularly interested in early years. So that is what I did. So then we go to 1996 when I started teaching as a newly qualified teacher. At the time, they were called NQTs. And everything was very different back then. So there wasn't the same support for NQTs that you have now. And NQT year was only 1 year back then as well. So I went straight into reception at an infant school. And it was a slightly special school in that it was one of the beacon status schools, which I don't even know if they exist anymore, but no, okay. So this is so long ago, I know. So this was a beacon status school, and the head was very involved in all of this and really had incredibly high standards. And because it was beacon status, that meant that people were constantly coming into the school to observe, to look at the paperwork, to learn from the school. So that could have gone very well as an NQT. I mean, it could have been a really wonderful school to be in and learn from. An example, it didn't really quite go that way, unfortunately. So I went in very naive, fresh-faced, very kind of, I was going to conquer the world and wasn't this wonderful. And I went in feeling like everybody was on my side, which wasn't the case. So my experience didn't match what I'd hoped would happen when I went into it. The pressures were ridiculously high in this school. I mean, we had whole staff meetings on how to double back your presentation materials for your display boards. And I have one memory. I have to share this memory because, I mean, anybody who knows me really well knows I actually don't retain memories very well. I'm not visual. And I think when you're not visual, I'm sort of on that scale. I'm very far on that scale of not being able to create pictures in my head. And I think that goes with not remembering things, because when you remember things in your life, you remember it visually. So I actually am not very good at remembering things. But this moment was so awful. But I wasn't great at art, didn't like doing display boards. This was not a school to be in if you weren't really creative. And I found that all very, very challenging. But I had a parent helper in my class who loved this stuff, loved cutting and sticking and creating things. And in my naivete, I thought that my time would be better spent actually preparing for teaching the children and, teaching the children rather than actually creating, this outfit. So this parent offered to come in and do some display boards, and I took her up on this so that I could actually use that time after school to prepare for teaching the children.
Oh, how foolish of you. How foolish.
I have never been so told off so publicly in all my life. I mean, I can't remember the words that were used, but I had made a huge error. I was meant to be doing those boards, handing them over to a parent was the worst possible thing I could have done. And she berated me in front of the parent, and I think probably later in a staff meeting as well. I don't remember exactly. But so it's a minor moment, but it was very it showed what the ethos of the school was and the pressure that as a newly qualified teacher that I was under. It was also at a time where things were a little bit different. So I had 30 children in my reception class with no teaching assistant. I had nobody. It was just me in there. Occasionally we would get one of these work experience students in, and I mean literal work experience, the 16-year-old work experience, not an actual teacher on training. So it was really pressured in that way. And then I think I was also quite naive about the other teachers. I think I kind of I hadn't really learned how people could be at that point. I kind of just thought everybody was nice and that they were what they seemed to be on the surface. And I was very unlucky. That there was a member of staff who was on the senior leadership team who I thought was my friend. and I thought was helping me. And it was, quite the opposite, to the point of just really some quite horrible things going on. And I spoke to I still have one very good friend, teacher from that school. And I said to her, help jog my memory about those days. And what she really remembered was me in tears in the staff room over this teacher who was just horrible. So I think it was a combination of all of those things, endless paperwork. This was the time of the literacy hour and the numeracy hour. Because we were a beacon status school, they were obsessed with the plans and the paperwork. We had to just endless amounts of plan. The paperwork had to go in, and they had to go in folders, and the head had to, it's almost like handing in homework. The head had to kind of approve it and tick it and all of this. So everybody was expected to arrive very early and stay late. I mean, I didn't have family. I didn't have children at that time. I was married, but I didn't have children. So, I mean, I didn't have those pressures, but it was just incredibly pressured. And then I am who I am, and I speak up when I see things I don't think are right for the children, and that didn't go down well. So that was kind of my experience. So I knew probably within 8 months that I didn't want to be there.
I just think, before we move into how you left, this is the bit I find fascinating. Everything you've just captured there, we started laughing and joking, going, well, God, it's 29 years ago, it's 30 years ago. There is nothing you've said there that could not apply to a Pick Pony podcast guest who left 2 weeks ago. You've talked about micromanagement. You've talked about becoming involved in backing display boards. We've had guests on who've talked about they weren't, and this was only recently, weren't sticking handouts in books straight.
I'm sure I probably got told off for that as well.
You've talked about cliques within the school, the bullying when their faces didn't fit because they were a threat. And it's really opened my eyes, because before you started talking, I go back to 1996, and if I could click my fingers and it'd be like it was then, I would still be in the classroom. So it's been a real eye-opener for me that nearly 30 years you were experiencing the same level of toxicity. So it makes me realise that it is teaching. Sometimes you touch lucky and sometimes you don't. But those behaviour traits, those toxic behaviours were there. And probably if we were speaking to a teacher who was an NQT in the 1950s, something similar would be happening. So it's fascinating, really, that it's almost like this institutionalised behaviour that we have the minute we have a hierarchical structure. And then to say, and after 8 months I knew, this is absolutely typical of what our guests say. Now, where our pit ponies come unstuck, Ilana, is they don't leave.
So I'm a little different.
And I'm suspecting you're telling me that, yes, you're a little different.
So, I mean, you know me, Sharon, and, so just take a step back for a second before I tell you how I left. It is sad that this is still the case today that I experienced back then. I think I could have had a different experience. So I could have landed in a different school. I could have had a different experience. Would I still have left? I think the answer is yes. Because I think it would have taken me a lot longer to leave. I think I would have stuck it out longer. But I don't think I ever fit that system. So landing in the school I landed in and having the experiences that I had pushed me out the door extremely quickly. But I think I would have left. Who knows? Because I didn't experience it. But, I think that I never would have stayed in teaching for long because I was never going to agree with the way things were being done. And anybody who knows me, I can't fit that. If I don't agree with it, I'm not going to do it, or not for long anyway. So I think I would have probably reached that same crunch point, but probably in a nicer way. Being bullied out and experiencing things I experience is not a nice way to leave. But I think that I could have probably come to the same conclusion in the end, that the classroom wasn't for me, because for me, separate to all those issues I just talked about, I actually didn't agree with the way the children were being taught. So I had 30 reception age children in my class, and I was doing things because I had to, that I didn't agree with in terms of how they were being taught. And that kind of is what pushed me out the door and in the direction that I went, because I felt that I could create a better environment for those children. But that wasn't going to happen in the school, because I had to, if I stayed in the system, I had to do what the system told me to do. And there was going to be no room for me to change that. So I knew I wanted to leave. And I wanted to stay with small children because I really liked them. I mean, that bit was the good bit of school, which I'm sure it is for most teachers. The kids was not the bit that was the problem. So, and I wanted to stay with that age group. So I decided that what I wanted to do was create a better environment for them. And that wasn't going to be school, but it was going to be preschool. So I ended up opening a nursery, initially with the intention to have preschool, or what I would have called at that point preschool education, so 3 to 5, pre-reception. But actually it expanded and it was all the way from babies. So we had from 3 months old, which was the age you could take at that time, through until they left for school. Now, it was a different time. So again, I'm going to go back in time slightly. This was not pre-Ofsted. So in my 2 years, I had Ofsted come in. So the 2 years I was at school, I had to experience, I don't think it was the first year, I think it was the second year, but I did have to experience Ofsted. And that put me off Ofsted for life. So going into nurseries at that point, into private nurseries, you could opt out of Ofsted. So Ofsted existed, but not in that realm yet. So nurseries were regulated by the local council rather than Ofsted. So anyway, I left. And in my mind, I hadn't left. In my mind, I'd left, and I decided I wanted to set up a nursery. Couldn't do this just, like that. It took time. So I stayed for that second year while I put sort of plans into place that nobody knew about, and it had to be secret plans. And I ended up approaching a secondary school that had land. So I was not in London at that point. I was in Essex, and there was more land. And I approached a secondary school that had land and put the proposal to them that I would build and set up a nursery on their site. In exchange, they could put their teachers' children in that nursery, and they saw that as a huge plus. So it was a private arrangement, a private business, and that is what I did. I built, literally, not with my own hands, but builder's hands, a building. So on land. On this secondary school site, built a small nursery that had a baby room for 3 to 2 year olds, 3 months old, 2 year olds, and then a preschool room for 2 up till when they went to school. And when I left the school, I think the head teacher wasn't just disappointed, but I think she felt personally wronged that I had come under false pretenses in her view. So I, had signed up to do this, and I think she took it really personally when I left. I don't think I cared at that point.
Yeah, like the way I'd have taken it really personally when she wiped the floor with me in front of that parent. But just bringing Sarah in, because Sarah's been sat listening along. She knows Ilana. She knows the energy we were going to get on this podcast. But when you said you found a plot of land and built a nursery, bearing in mind, how old were you then, Ilana?
Well, let's see. I went to uni late. I did the International Baccalaureate over 3 years when I came back from the US. So I didn't graduate till I was 19. Then I took a year off to swan around and do nothing. So by the time I went to uni, I was 21. So let's see, 21. I mean, I don't know. I must have been 26, 27. So I mean, I wasn't that young, but
no, but come on, the ripe old age of 26, and you've gone, I've got an idea. I'll find a plot of land. I'll go and approach a head teacher, and I'll go and build a nursery. I mean, Sarah, we didn't even know this about her, did we?
No. And honestly, I knew because Sharon doesn't share the details of the pre-conversations with me deliberately to get a reaction from me. It's very calculated, and I'm stunned. I had no idea, and now I'm thinking what I was like at 26, and thinking I just wouldn't have the gumption to even start to think about that. Never mind figure out how it all works. That says a lot about you.
Well, you know me.
Yeah, we do
Yes.
know it. But think about it, Sarah. If you take Alana's situation, she's gone into teaching. Yeah, okay, there's a strategic decision made. I need these 2 years. I know this is probably not just a job for life, but I am sure, even with that strategic decision in mind, you could have been really diminished and eroded over those 2 years with the behaviours. You had somebody who was a smiling assassin who was turning on you. You had a head teacher who humiliated you. All of those pressures. And you can see how people fold very, very quickly. And yet you decided, and I think this is the difference with what I heard from you. Your head teacher was right. You did use them. You used that last year for exactly what you needed. And when that transactional relationship has shifted, I don't need you. I'm detached from the outcome of what's going to happen. I think that's possibly where you were in a position to go, right, now I'm going to do what I want to for the rest of my life. And I think that's quite important for our listeners. If you're building your exit strategy from within, like the Great Escape, you're tunneling from within, then that should be your hope and the strength that you need, because you've got, oh my God, I'm on the Great Escape. You've got the light at the end of your tunnel, and you had it knowing it was still in education. So you build a nursery, correct?
Yeah. So remembering that I'd gone into this because I wanted to be an educational psychologist, at this point I knew I was not going to become an educational psychologist because I would have had to stay in the school. I can't remember the number. It might have been 5 or 6 years. I don't remember the number of years that was required. So I had to make that choice then that I wasn't. So it wasn't just a choice about leaving that school. It was actually a choice about changing my future, because my plan had been to be an educational psychologist. And if I left, I couldn't be an educational psychologist anymore. So I made that decision and said, right, it's not worth it. I can't stay in the classroom for the amount of years that I need to do it to become an educational psychologist. So I completely changed my plan then. And I thought, well, I really enjoyed working with children. I'm going to go and have a nursery. So I took loans, and, it cost a fair amount of money to build a building from scratch. And I set up this nursery. So it was regulated by the local council at that point. We opened with, I can't remember how many children in it, and it all went well. Then Ofsted complicated things. I don't remember the year that it happened, but things changed, and there was voluntary Ofsted for nurseries, and this was at the point that the vouchers came in. So if the nursery was Ofsted registered, then parents could use these vouchers for 2 hours a day or whatever it was. And initially, and Sarah, you won't be surprised by this, I said no. We're not going to be registered by Ofsted. Because I could, right? And I'd had this bad experience at school, and I thought, no, I don't want to do what Ofsted tells me to do. I want to do what I know is right for these kids, and I don't want Ofsted to have any word in this. That wasn't sustainable. So that lasted for however many years. But I mean, the reality was that system took over. And if you didn't take those vouchers, that was going to have a negative financial impact. So, and then at one point anyway, all nurseries had to be Ofsted registered. So there was a shift. But initially, I didn't do that. And I just did things the way that I felt that they should be done. Things went well with this nursery. And then I decided to open a second. I opened a second branch in a different town, not on a school site. So this was just in a building. And at that point, then I was moving between. So I'd moved from kind of day-to-day management of the nursery and being on site as one of the numbered named people looking after the children to not doing that anymore. And I moved between sites, and I had a manager at each site. I also had children at that point. So, in all of this, I was married. So at the point that I did my PGCE, I got married just after my PGCE. So when I went into school, I was already married. Same person I'm married to now, all these years later. We are still together. And then I had a child when all this was going on. So my role had to change a little bit in that I had a baby, and I luckily could bring my baby to work. So, not only was I the boss, but I actually had a nursery. So it was fairly easy to do that. But my role did shift. So I enjoyed, I think I did it for about 7 years. I'd have to go back and check the years, but I think it was about 7 years. And I did enjoy it, but two things happened. So one, I tend to like a challenge and something new. And once I've done it, I tend to like a new challenge. So I had kind of done this challenge and succeeded at it and sort of got a little bit bored, I suppose, by that. And I wasn't really it's like you're not in the classroom anymore at that point. And then I got pregnant with my second child, and I was still living out in Essex, managing these two nurseries, and I decided I didn't actually want to be in Essex anymore. I'm from London. My family was in London, and I actually wanted to go back to London. So to facilitate that, I needed to do two things. One, not be there anymore because it was a long drive from central London back out to Essex. And also financially needed to sell the nurseries. So I sold them as a chain, a small chain of two nurseries. I sold them on and moved into London at that point. I couldn't tell you what year that was now either.
Wow, Ilana. That is it's quite special, that, isn't it, Sarah, to just have somebody in their mid to late 20s build the nurseries and then say, no, I'm going back to London. You will not be hooked in, will you? There's something about you, Ilana, that's going, I don't chain myself to things. What do you think, Sarah? This is quite revealing from the woman we've danced with on the dance floor at the National Tutors Conference. This is really good stuff. What are your thoughts, Sarah Dunwood?
The thing that's really stuck with me, and in a slightly different context, but you said made a complete change. I chose to make a complete change to the life plan. And that for me goes back to what so many of our kind of group members and guests, what Sharon was alluding to before, the getting stuck because of the fears, the expectations, all of the worries. And I think there's a real clear personality trait with you and something inside you that goes, yeah, no, I'm done. Next thing, let's go. And I'm going to do that and I'm going to excel at it. And then I'm going to find the next thing. And actually, that's really refreshing to hear, particularly as I've gone back to 25, 26, 27 in my head. Not a chance I'd have been doing that. But I think about my own missed opportunities where actually my heart was telling me, go and do something else. But my head was going, oh, well, you can't do that. So I think it's really genuinely really inspirational to hear somebody just go, yeah, no, that's what I did.
I think what it is, Sarah, when I was listening, words pop into my head. You had no fear of the unknown. And I think that's, people talk about the fear of leaving, and it's not necessarily the financial fear. It's that catch-all statement, the fear of the unknown. I would rather stay where I am, where it's known, even though it might only meet 60% of my needs, because the fear of the unknown is too great a risk. You didn't have an issue with taking risks, and you did not fear the unknown.
So I think I'd love to pick up on a couple of those things. So you're absolutely right. I am a risk taker in life, not in physical things. You will never catch me jumping off buildings. I'm scared of all those kind of, those sort of adventure things. Never going to happen. I'm not a risk taker in that sense. But I am a risk taker in other ways in my life. I'm not tied to outcomes. I'm happy to change direction. And I like that shift and that challenge. And it's definitely a personality trait. But I'd hate for any of the listeners to sort of think, well, I'm not that person. I'm not a risk taker. Therefore, I will never leave teaching. So that's not the message to take away from this. And I've got friends who are still in teaching. Okay, so I know, even though I've been a long time out of the classroom, I know those decisions, and I know, I have one of my best friends who is still in teaching, who was at that school with me, let me add. So this is a friend that goes right back to that school, and I'm still friends with her. She's not going to leave teaching. She doesn't have that same personality, but that doesn't mean that it's the wrong decision for her. She has she has found other ways to make teaching work. And I know the podcast is about leaving teaching, but I think it's also worth thinking about, if you're not a risk taker and you're not going to do what I do, which is go, I know, I want to go and, do this and just jump out, you can make other changes. And this is what my friend has done. And she has reworked her plan within teaching to make it work better for her, found a better school to be at, found a different teaching role. So I am who I am, and I genuinely think I was born this way. My personality is what it is, and that's allowed me to take some of the leaps that I've taken over my lifetime. But you don't have to have that to make changes in your life.
Brief interlude, dear listener. Couple of questions. Are you a tutor or even a pit pony considering tutoring? And do you fancy getting in the room with myself and Sarah Dunwood learning about the wonderful world of tuition? Then why not join us at the National Tutors Conference hosted by Connexus Tuition on the 29th of July 2025. It's at Chesford Grange, Kenilworth. Links to the tickets are in the show notes below, and we will both see you on the other side.
And I think that goes to something, because obviously the podcast is tied really tightly with the Facebook group, and we occasionally get it where people are asking about applying to another school or doing this or doing that, and just occasionally somebody will pipe up with, why are you in the group? And our group's quite clearly defined that life after teaching doesn't necessarily mean life after teaching full stop. It might actually mean life after teaching in the environment that you are in, and you find something else. So I think it's really important that you said that. Thank you.
So,
certainly sorry, go ahead.
Carry on, love. I've got the kettle on here. This is absolutely fascinating. Where are we up to? So you're moving back to London.
I sold the nurseries, moved back to London, and at that point had 2 of my 3 children. I have 3, but at that point I had 2, and they were young at that point. So people who know me, because the next bit is public. I mean, it's not. I don't talk much about the classroom and the bit that you've just heard about. You're probably the first people that I've. In fact, you will be the first people who probably know that. So, but the next bit most people know, and that's that having had that experience, and it directly relates to that time in the classroom, I chose not to put my children in the classroom. And it's a fairly common story. You will find amongst the home education community, lots and lots of teachers or ex-teachers, because having been in that environment, they don't actually want to put their children into it. And that was certainly the case for me. And I had decided before I even got pregnant with my first child, so after I'd left the classroom and was in nursery and was just thinking one day I'm going to have children, that child was not going to school. So that decision was made before that child was even conceived, which is different to many people who end up in home ed. And the home ed landscape has changed, and I'm not going to turn this into a home ed discussion, but it's changed. If we think back, this was a long time ago. So I was quite unusual, as I always am in that respect. I've made that decision back then. So I was in London and I had 2 young children, and they were not going to school. They weren't old enough at that point, but at one point, then became old enough. So I was home educating. So my next career, and I actually do consider it a career. So we think my first career was teaching. My second career was the nurseries. My third career was home educating my children. And I did that for 20 years. It's actually only just come to an end last year. So my youngest is 16 and is in sixth form. So all of my children were home educated up to sixth form and then went in at sixth form. So my youngest went into sixth form this year. So officially last summer was the end of 20 years of home ed. Now, I didn't just dedicate those 20 years to home ed, but in the early years when my children were young, it was a full-time career, 100% full-time career for me. So I wasn't doing anything else. But I was living in London. And London is very expensive, and it was very expensive back then. And, my husband had a job in London, but it wasn't a particularly high-paying job, or certainly not for London. And it just couldn't go on. And he came home one day and he said to me, "You've got to work." And I had two of the 3 children at that point. He said, "We can't go on like this. You've got to work." And I was pissed. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say that on the podcast. I was absolutely pissed off at him. And it wasn't his fault, God bless him. It really wasn't his fault, but it was the situation. I didn't want to work. I was looking after these children. I was home these children. And that was not what I wanted to do. That was not where I was in my mind, in my life. But I had no choice at that point. And that is how I got into the last career. I'd like to think of it as the last career, where I am now and where I've been for 13 or more years now. So I got into tutoring because what skills did I have? Well, I had a lot of skills, a lot of skills at that point, because I had set up successfully, a business, and I had done business mentoring and things at that point, and I could have done a number of different things, but I had 2 young children. And these children weren't at school, so I couldn't work during school hours. I was fairly tied that there was very few things that were going to fit with my life. So the obvious thing, obviously, was to tutor at that point. And I was very lucky. I lived across the street from my mother. So my mother was on hand to look after the children. And I don't know what we would have done without that. I don't see how it would have been possible for me to tutor or do any job in reality. We couldn't have afforded childcare, and I don't know what I would have done, but I was very lucky. My mother literally lived across the street, in the building across the street from us. So she had the children, and this was back in the days of face-to-face tuition, and I went off to tutor, and I signed up to some tutoring agencies, local. I was living right in the heart of London. For anyone who knows London, I lived right around the corner from the Sherlock Holmes Museum. I mean, I was in Madame Tussauds. I was literally in the very, very center of London. And local agencies would send me out to very young children because that was my background. I had a specialism in early years from teaching. I had my early years teaching experience in school, and then I'd run nurseries. I mean, so my early years knowledge and experience was pretty good. So the obvious place for them to send me was to very young children. And in central London, what are very, very young children doing who are being tutored, even back then? They are doing entrance exams, because in London we have the 7+ entry point. And the children who are taking tuition for 7+, so 7+ is the entry point to get you into prep school for year 3, but it's taken in year 2, early in year 2. So the children are 5 and 6 that you're tutoring. So when they had me on their books, they were like, "Oh, you're central London, and you have all this phenomenal early years experience. You are the obvious person." So I was highly sought after to send out these jobs. There was only one very, very minor little issue with any of this, which was I'd never even heard of the 7+. My background wasn't in private school. So you've just heard my background. So, I mean, I did go to a private school. So, in my teen years, in doing international school, when I came back to the UK, I was in an international school, but not a prep school in that sense. So I had zero background in prep school of any kind. And I'd never heard of the 7+. That didn't stop agencies from sending me out to these jobs with absolutely zero knowledge. But that's how I was thrown into this world of entrance exams that I now sit in. And it was a very steep learning curve. But I mean, as you've learned from me, in what you've known of me before and just listening today, it doesn't usually faze me, and I don't mind a complete change. And I see it as a challenge. And I did. I mean, I love this age group and I love the kids. And so all I actually needed to do, and it didn't seem hard to me, was to learn about the entrance exams, right? So that wasn't hugely problematic, except that it's an incredibly secretive world and nobody would tell me anything. So it seemed like it wasn't going to be a challenge, but it was an enormous challenge because nobody will talk about it. It's almost like it doesn't exist. So I had to kind of learn on the fly and work it out for myself, which I did over time. And I can honestly say, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, I'm sad to say it, but I'm not embarrassed to say it, that I failed those children in those first couple of years because I didn't have the knowledge that I needed. And I blame the agencies for that 100%. But so I was a great teacher, but I didn't have that specialist knowledge. And I feel very sorry for those children who didn't get the best chance they could have had at those entrance exams because of the situation that I was put into and that they were put into.
It really is specialist knowledge, isn't it?
Hugely specialist, yeah.
Hugely, and can differ between boroughs and towns and cities. It is a really, really specialist area. And you're absolutely right in what you're saying. These kids only get one bite of the cherry. And no, I completely completely hear you. But you found your way here into this world. You accepted the early days of it. And I suspect you were probably tinkering around the edges like I was with tutoring, probably at the same time and the same period where we'd not hit social media. So there didn't feel like a saturation of tutors. But every man and his dog had a tutor, but we just didn't know about it. And I mean, we are going to do an episode on mainstream tutoring at some point. We've got some great guests lined up for that. But this is really, really specific. It is becoming an entrance exam tutor. So how long, Ilana, did you do solo tutoring? And that was your route, because I know now you offer so much more in terms of that world. But how long did you do that for? How long did you hot foot it to kids' houses?
I'm still doing it.
Same here.
I have not stopped doing it. So 13, 14 years. I mean, it's counting. I have no plans to stop. The only shift happened between the in-person and the online. But just to go back to something you said there, Sharon. So the differences and the difficulty is even worse at 7+. And remember, I was thrown in at 7+. I hadn't even heard of 11+ at that point. I was literally only going to 7+ jobs. And 7+ varies school to school, not even borough to borough. It's a whole other world to 11+. So it was even more ridiculous to go in and not have this knowledge. And it was only later that I also went into the 11+ world as well. So I still tutor, and I still tutor one-to-one. That has not changed. I still have, and before I came in to do this, today, just before, I had a 5-year-old. And just before that, I had a 6-year-old that I'm teaching for 7+ exams. So, and every day after school, I have usually about 5 students that I teach for a combination of 7+, 8+, and 11+. So I go the whole sort of gamut of those. So I'm not planning to leave it. I still love it. Although I do that wide age range, if you look at that history and everything I did, I still love the youngest children, and that hasn't changed. I have a mixture between the age groups, but what lights up my face and what makes me happy every day is these very, very young children, and that hasn't changed.
Do you know what doesn't light up my face? Is very, very young children. And to be perfectly honest, if they're not wearing long trousers and in year 10 and above, no tolerance whatsoever. So you and I differ. I think that's where our paths have slightly gone in different routes. And I can feel your enthusiasm for what you're doing. So let's chart this. Teacher, built your own nursery, home educated your kids, and you've gone into the world of an entrance exam tutor in London. Now, what else do you do? Because you've now almost gone on a quest in many ways to support the tutoring community. And you are a figurehead within that community.
Oh, thank you. So again, if we think about my personality and the kind of path that I've taken, I was never going to just be satisfied with tutoring every day, because I love it and I'm never going to leave it. But, you can see from my life history that I am an entrepreneur. I think that was probably born in me. And, another reason why I think I never would have stayed in the classroom, because it didn't allow for those skills to kind of come out. So there was always going to be more than that. But it all sort of developed from what we just talked about, that secretive world, that lack of being supported. It was almost like being back in the classroom again, where, I didn't really have support. Technically, support was there. Structurally, support was there in the classroom, but I never felt any of it. When I then went into entrance exams, again, you can make comparisons. Structurally, there was support there because I was working for agencies at that point. So there should have been people to support me, to give me the information that I needed that would give these children the best possible outcome. The reality, just like in the classroom, was something completely different. And I have one really clear memory that mirrors exactly what happened in the classroom. So I was working for a few different agencies. I was working for one in particular. And they said to me, I'd like you to do an assessment on a 7+ student, a formal assessment. Never done that before. And I said, sure. Can you give me some information and show me what it is you want me to actually do? No. Now, keeping in mind that the person who asked me, the owner of this agency, was regularly running assessments. It was part of what she did for older children. There was a structure there that she could have shared. But in this world, it was very much what's mine is mine, and I'm never sharing it. And I saw that in the classroom. I mean, just going back, I know we're trying to go forward, but going back to the classroom, I had this one of these memories of Playmobil. I know it sounds ridiculous, but another of these very clear memories. I was in the reception classroom. We didn't have Playmobil. It was in the year 1 classroom. And I can remember one day going in and asking, could I borrow the Playmobil? I can't remember why it was relevant, but, I wanted to borrow it. No, you can't borrow my Playmobil. That's my Playmobil in my classroom, and you can't have it. Essentially, that wasn't the words that were used, but it was this ridiculousness. But I saw this with agencies, and I still see it today. I mean, this hasn't changed. So there was no support for me, and I didn't want that for other people. So what happened was I was working with an agency when I had become much more experienced. So this was sort of down the line. I'd become much more experienced in entrance exams, become more of a specialist, working with this agency on a more consulting basis. And they asked me to develop a training program for their tutors who wanted to teach for entrance exams so that they weren't in this position. And I was so on board because suddenly here was an agency that was getting it, right? There's no point putting them out there to parents if they don't actually know what they're doing. So let's provide that for them. So it was a great initiative, and I was very on board with that. And I was involved in the recruitment of these tutors and the teaching of them, the structuring of the program, etc. So it was great. But it didn't go far enough, in my view. So it's kind of like going back to the classroom, going, I don't like the way they're doing this. I'm going to do it my own way because I know my own way is better. And, that mirrors through my life. I left the classroom because I didn't like the way they're doing it. I set up the nursery so I could do it my way. Ended up leaving the nursery, doing it my way with my own children. Because why are my children not in school? Because I could do it better. My children had no reason. I mean, I had decided they weren't going to be in school before I even met my children. So it wasn't like nowadays where people pull their children out of school for various reasons of not fitting. It wasn't like that. It was that same path. I could do it better, so I was going to do it better. And it was the same thing. Here was something I set up with this agency. It was good. It was better than what other agencies were doing, but it wasn't good enough, in my view. So then the obvious next step was to make it good enough. So I set up my own training program and support program for tutors who wanted to move into this market because I could do it better. So it makes me sound really conceited, and I don't come from a place of conceit. I come from a place of control, I guess, that if I see something I don't like, I want to be able to change it and control it and make it better. So that's the motivation. And it started, way back in school for me, and it hasn't changed now. So I developed a training program for tutors that has the support that was so missing. So not just here's how you do it, but here I am, so you can actually ask me questions. So, unlike the head or the senior, staff in the school who wouldn't help me and support me, or the agencies who said, no, that's mine, I'm not sharing that with you because you might use it and take it away from me. Everything is sort of geared around, here's everything I know and everything I can share with you, and let me help you.
And I mean, that is so important because I find in the main, the business world is incredibly collaborative. I think LinkedIn is a great place. And for those who may or may not know, Sarah and I sit in the tuition world because we sit at the helm of a franchising business, Connexus Tuition. And how I first discovered you, Ilana, was on your LinkedIn through your presence. Sarah has started following you first, I think, and she was alerting me to follow this woman. And 3 years ago, we actually invited you to our franchisee conference day, and then the following day, the National Tutors Conference, where through workshops and keynote speeches, you shared your information. Then what we actually did was we bought into your course, and that's hosted now on our online training platform. Because you're absolutely right. 11 plus, 7 plus, it's almost like Fight Club. The first rules of 11 plus is nobody talks about 11 plus. But here, You've stepped into a world where you are sharing your knowledge. And yes, it is your business, and rightly so, because if you have something of value, there has to be a financial transaction. But when you become the authority on something, then you're almost duty bound, I think, in many ways, to share that for exactly the person who you, or the couple of people you alluded to about 10 minutes ago, the kids you felt you let down in the early years. I don't want that happening again, and it doesn't have to happen again, because if we have that abundant mindset, there will always be more children than can meet the demands of tutors, 100%. And I've loved working with you, and you're absolutely right. There's always that professionalism, but warmth. There's the knowledge and the willingness to share it and support the community. And I know you do work outside. You're great in networking events. Your work with the Tutors Association. You are really very much within the world of tuition. And I know that many people will find your links in the show notes below and will reach out to you and have a look what you do and what you offer, and they will be better off for it. Hello, loyal listeners. It's that time in the episode when me and Sarah put out our little begging bowl and ask you to help fund our podcast, because it's coming out of our pockets, and our kids have been living on beans on toast for months while we've been messing about pretending we're live on Loose Women. There's going to be a link in the episode notes, and it's called Buy Us a Coffee. This is your chance to help fund the podcast, give a little something back. Thank you. I can't believe I'm going to ask you now, in light of that story, I have no idea what you're going to say. Ilana, what's your sliding doors moment that, had you have not decided to go and build a nursery with your own hands, then home educate your kids and crack the 7+ market in central London, had you have stayed in the classroom? Give me a sliding doors moment in your life that you know for a fact wouldn't have happened had you not have left your school.
I think it's going to be my children. I would have had my children, but I think the sliding doors moment is if I hadn't stepped out of the classroom and stuck with my belief that the system was wrong, I wouldn't have home educated my children. And the lasting implications of that are huge. So as well as it being such a big part of my life and my identity for a long time and sort of enriched my life, it would have changed the life of all 3 of my children who have gone on to do amazing things because of that journey that they went on. So I think it's very likely I wouldn't have come to home education if I had stayed in the classroom. And that's probably not, I'm thinking that the answer you were expecting was related to entrance exams and what I do now.
And to be fair, you're right in what you're saying. You didn't remove your children from school because it wasn't working. That was a conscious decision that you had. I'm going to use the word, the luxury of being able to do because of the sacrifice you made, when stepping outside of the classroom. Well, at our conference, right, we do this thing. It's a free raffle, and it's called the B&M raffle, okay? And we raffle stuff from B&M that I can get for under £1. Ilana King was, I think, the only person bar one last year at our conference who, when I announced the B&M raffle, said, "What's B&M? You'd never heard of B&M?"
In my defense, I spent the first, I grew up in the US. There is no B&M in the US. And I moved back to central London. There is no B&M in central London.
Peasants, they're behind the times.
So it wasn't. However, I love that raffle. That was one of the highlights of the conference for me. It was very educational.
I think the moment somebody on your table won a packet of scented pink bin liners. And by the time I'd drawn out the next ticket, you lot had fashioned them into fancy dress. You were wearing them. I think that gives the flip side to the authority, the entrepreneur, the all-round inspirational pick pony guest that we've had on today. Ilana King, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, oof, that was a roller coaster, wasn't it?
I feel like I've had 3 triple shots of coffee.
That's Ilana King. That's why she's in our world. That's why she's in our mixer. Because that energy, it really, to me, it wasn't a typical pick pony episode, but I think it stands well within what we are trying to achieve, particularly with the aspirational elements of our podcasts.
If Ilana had a strapline, if she had a marketing, for her as a person, doing it my way because I can do it better. And it was interesting because at no point during any of what she talked about and everything that she's achieved, which is mind-blowing, the different things that she's done, at no point did it come across as anything other than she knows her values, she knows what drives her, and she goes for what she wants to do. And I that's so empowering to hear somebody with that level of energy and that level of commitment to their own self-worth and goals. Absolutely phenomenal.
She's very humble. She is a very, very humble person. She's very wise as well. She doesn't suffer fools gladly. And there is something very, very special about her. And it's an absence of imposter syndrome. There's an absolute absence of imposter syndrome. And what she said was, I will take risks. Calculated risks, but I will take risks. Because at any given time, she should still be in that classroom. She should still probably have 4 nurseries now, or 5 nurseries. She's really carved a niche for herself in the business world with the entrance exam market that she does. Because she's sharing and she's collaborative. And she went back, didn't she, to that mentality of, no, you're not having my Playmobil, or no, I'm not sharing that handout with you because we'll duplicate the work. That scarcity mindset.
I think it goes to something for me that and it is, I'm sure it's a phrase that I have seen said. I definitely haven't made it up, but there's enough to go around. Whatever it is that we're doing, there's enough to go around. I mean, you and I know we sit in the world of tuition. I've recently redone my research stats on the size of the market for tuition in the UK, and it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing, the potential spend that's sat out there. And I think that's one of the joys of the tutoring community generally, is that collaboration is important, and that might be networking, or it might be paying to go on an online training course or a face-to-face or whatever it is. But generally, I think because the tuition sector, in terms of the people who are delivering, has become increasingly teachers who've exited away from that environment that we talk about so often here and in the group. I think generally, in the main, people are bringing a different human approach to it in terms of how they interact and work with each other, even if they're in the same local area or whatever. There's collaboration and kindness and consideration and a willingness to give advice and support and lend a listening ear. And I think that's something that Ilana does it is so much. And she does have an amazing community of her own and all the rest of it, but she is so, I was about to like do an arm gesture. She doesn't close it all off and keep it to herself. And I think that's one of the magic bits about the tuition sector, is that it is evolving in that way. There's always going to be, whenever you get humans together in groups, there's always going to be little pockets.
I think in some respects, the tutoring community and the life after teaching community reflect everything that we've come away from that was wrong within education. And it's almost like once bitten, twice shy, isn't it? Actually, we know people who've been involved in that level of toxicity and jealousy and the scarcity mindset. So actually, you find your tribe. Once you've been burnt or once you've been exposed to something, you now recognize what you don't want. And I always talk about that personal check-in I have with myself. How does this make me feel? And if it makes me feel like I used to feel when I was in a toxic school environment, I am out of there, because there's that many opportunities out there. Once you leave the classroom or you're trying to exit the classroom, you can start to build your own tribe. Ilana could see the red flags at the age of 26, before red flags was even an expression. She had a head teacher who publicly roasted her in front of a parent. She had a smiling assassin of a colleague that was out to sabotage her. So she was very savvy from an early age. And actually, it's not just, part of the problem is some people don't recognize that this is not normal and acceptable, because they've got low self-worth and they think, well, that's okay to treat somebody like that. Well, it's okay to treat me like that. So number one, they accept it. They're unaware that these things can be happening sometimes. And then they don't know what to do about it. And they sit in it for too long. You can vote with your feet. And I think that's what you do. You might be a bit nomadic and you go from tribe to tribe because tribes change, you know. But that's why she's in our world. You know, that's why we spend time with Ilana, because you know what you're going to get with her. And she is passionate about what she was talking about. And I'd not heard all of that, you know, Sarah, the early doors with her.
No, I didn't have any idea that was her route through her adult life. And I think what was really interesting for me is that, reflecting back on 96 when she started, I first started in 95, I think you started in 94. It made me realize that I touched very lucky in my first two schools, my first 8 years. In fact, the first 15, 16 years of my career, I touched very lucky, because I didn't experience that. I didn't have that experience as an NQT. In fact, I was the NQT year where there was no probation year. You literally qualified, went in, crack on. And I think my year and your year was the 2 years where that was the case. So it really has made me reflect, kind of from a position of gratitude, that how lucky I was in finding the schools that were right for me at that point in time, but also how desperately sad it is that level of conformity, that requirement to do things in a particular way, and it probably started happening around that time, to be honest.
Well, she was in a beacon school, and I think that was a forerunner for what they wanted all schools to be like. So if you weren't in a beacon school, like I wasn't, and you had a great head of department called Harry Morovsky, who didn't even have a scheme of work, who let you get on with it, who trusted you on site.
It blows my mind when I think about it, that I just walked in, second year of teaching. My first year I worked in one school. It was a fixed term. second year of teaching, I walked in, I was the only business studies teacher. There was no scheme of work, and it was basically, you know the syllabus, teach it the way you want to teach it. And I don't think there was no book scrutiny. I've talked about this before. No lesson observations. Nobody came and took my planner. I was probably about 6 years in, aside from one Ofsted inspection. I was about 6 years in before somebody came and sat in a classroom with a clipboard, and even then it was supportive. So when you sit and listen to what's happening now in schools, not all schools, but a lot of schools, that and particularly poignant this week with the announcement of the new Ofsted framework, which is supposed to be shifting us away from one-word judgments, and now it's gone to 5 judgments and multiple criterias, and it's just going to make it worse. And we could sit and talk about that for hours. The whole thing to do with accountability, conformity, and how that's impacted on over 25, 30 years, multiple generations of children in real terms, that makes me really, really sad. But yeah, I think that attitude of it's okay to make a complete change to your life plan. Yeah. And if you do that 4, 5, 6 times in your life, then so be it.
Because actually, what I'm finding in my support calls with members of Life After Teaching, their life plan does change, but it's not with them in control. So you might sometimes have to accept that your life can't be mapped out as you want it to be, because things happen, and they either happen because you're in the driving seat, or they're going to happen because somebody else is, and it's how you roll with it and how you deal with what's thrown at you. And having the foresight to sit there and go, this isn't right. So I just thought she's an absolute powerhouse. She's always high energy, and it was a fascinating podcast episode. It really was. It was unusual, but again, what she said was tutoring, particularly entrance exams, huge market out there, and actually, what I think is quite important about the 11 plus, for want of the easiest route to talk about, particularly the non-verbal element, it isn't taught in schools. So if you are not an English specialist, or if you're a DT teacher, or if you are a modern foreign languages teacher, you can actually skill yourself up in a brand new curriculum with the likes of Ilana, with your own research, with lots of organisations we work with, and that can be your skill that you take out and tutor. So it was a very rich episode for me. It really was.
But also, to be fair, her workshops the last 2 years have been, they have been so, I mean, last year people got goodie bags full of little things, tactile things for helping with. And the year before, I've never seen a room full of adults jump up on command and dash to walls to go and grab things. She's so good.
Well, speaking of our conference this year, our keynote, well, one of our keynotes this year is again Mr. Drew Povey, star of stage and screen. And we are going off, are we not, now, to go and get our glad rags on, because we're meeting Povey in the pub.
Yep.
And
Povey in the pub.
Povey in the pub.
Pit pony meeting Povey in the pub. There's your alliteration.
Because we're nailing him on, aren't we, for an episode? So that'll be one with an E in brackets if I know him. Right, so let's go and get our glad rags on, and let's go and see the main man. And as always, Sarah, fantastic episode. And tonight I'm not going to say I'll see you on the other side. I'll see you in the Saracens Ed at 7:30. Trial. Thanks for staying with us during another great episode of the Pit Pony podcast. And on behalf of myself, Sarah Dunwood, Mike Roberts at Making Digital Real, we wish you all the very best, and we'll see you soon. If you wish to contact me directly for a support session or a clarity call for your next steps, please find my link in the comments below. See you soon.